Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Behavioral Grooves brings a behavioral science lens to understanding why we do the things that we do through interesting conversations with our guests.
We have been on this journey for almost 2 years now and are closing in on 100 episodes. So you know what that means, Tim?
Not exactly. What does that mean, Kurt?
It means we're going to have a celebration and have our 100th episode extravaganza.
Okay. Yeah, so that is coming up on the 17th of October in 2019, and we're going to be hosting our 100th episode at the Pennsylvania Academy for the Performing Arts. Doors open at 6 p.m.
Show starts at 7. Doors open at 6.
Yes.
And you are not going to want to miss this. We are bringing back one of our favorites, Annie Duke, and another one of our favorites, Michael Hallsworth. They're going to be on stage together and we'll be asking them questions on decision making and the application of behavioral science to real world problems.
Yeah, we're also going to be having the very funny and very insightful Jeff Chrysler on stage. I can't even say it without laughing because he makes me crack up. And you never really know what's going to happen with Jeff.
But it's always good.
It's always going to be good.
It's always good.
Yes. Yeah. Also, so tickets are on sale now. They are going fast. So if you are within an hour's drive or a train trip to Philly, there's really no excuse for you not to be there.
Of course. But if you're not that close to Philly, we're also going to be live streaming this with the help of one of our sponsors and our pod service host, Podbean. They provide the background to Behavior Grooves getting heard out in the world, and now they are bringing a new live stream service to the market, and we're going to be one of the first podcasts to actually use this new service.
It's going to be really cool, and the event is going to be super fun. We also want to thank People Science, who is one of our sponsors for this great live event that's going to be happening. They bring some of the best research and insights on applying behavioral science to work, so make sure you check them out.
Okay, let's talk about our episode today with Professor Brad Shuck.
Good idea.
Brad is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership, Evaluation, and Organizational Development at the University of Louisville.
Or Louisville.
Louisville. No, I think it's Louisville, right? I think that's how they say it. He is also recognized as one of the world's most knowledgeable experts on employee engagement and is a sought-after speaker from around the world.
Yeah, Brad's work on engagement and leadership, as well as employee health and well-being, are really at the cutting edge of the field right now. We are so lucky to have been able to talk to him about all these things in this episode, plus a whole lot more. We even got to talk to him about stinky leaders.
Yes, we did. And by the way, Tim, did you shower this morning? I'm smelling something.
I'll never tell because this is a podcast and our listeners will never know. So with that, take a moment to relax, open your mind up, and listen to our very engaging conversation with Dr. Brad Shuck. Brad Shuck, welcome to the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. How awesome.
We are excited to have you here, and it's going to be a great session, and we're going to start it off with a speed round. And as a listener of this, I'm afraid that you're already going to know the answers because we tend to stick with the same speed round questions.
Well, let's just totally make up something new and just twist him up.
All right. Hot dog or hamburger?
Oh, hamburger all the way.
All right.
Up the mountain or down the mountain?
Ooh, I like going up the mountain.
All right. Coke or Pepsi?
Coca-Cola, man. Oh. Coca-Cola.
A true Southerner.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, when you're in Kentucky, you drink Coke.
Hey, come. Pepsi's out of Texas.
So what?
All right. Maybe I'm wrong there. I don't know.
We don't call that the South in Kentucky.
Okay, which is better at engaging employees, the carrot or the stick?
Oh, the carrot, man, all the way, 100%.
Yeah. Okay, so why? Why is a carrot better?
I think
shouldn't you just have some good damn rules and just let people know what the hell they got to get done and just go do it.
And here's the punishment if you don't.
And you're lucky to have a job.
And so I think that is the problem with the state of engagement right now, is that we have policy and procedure stuff to death for decades. And what we really need to do is help people find meaning and fill them up in a way that drives that meaning. And that is a carrot, my friend. That is a carrot.
So talk more about finding meaning. What find meaning in what?
Yeah, so I think it's about finding like meaningful work. So if we reach back into the research, Kahn wrote this article. This guy named William Kahn works at Boston University, wrote this article around the psychological conditions of meaning or engagement at work. And meaningful work was one of the conditions that came out of that research. And we have tested over and over and over again in our research. And the idea that someone says, I find meaning in my work drives engagement every time.
So what is meaningful work for people? Is it all over the board? Are there some common factors that we can go, oh, if you do these 3 things, we're going to find meaning? Where is that research going?
So I think sometimes it's in the messaging. It's in the messages that we get from our leaders. It's in the messages we get from our coworkers. It's the recognition that we get in our work that there's some kind of connection to an end goal or an end product. I'm not just making these boxes to be making these boxes, but they're going out for a reason. There's something connected to this that's got joy. Now, here's some words we don't use in HR very often: love, joy, compassion, dignity. Those kinds of things drive meaning. Those kinds of things drive meaning.
Well, but those are hard to create rules around, right? I mean, it's easier to create rules around policies and procedures, and if you just do this the right way, then everything's going to be fine, and you'll be a productive worker, right?
That's right. And we just have some new research out in Human Resource Development Quarterly that talks specifically to that it's far easier to live in a world that's policied and procedured and managed and rigorous than it is to live in a place of dignity, authenticity, presence, accountability, and empathy. It's I can spend less time thinking about people if I'm distracted, dishonest, disingenuous, use humiliation as my leadership style. That's way easier for me than it is to treat people with dignity. Way easier.
Wow. I'm not getting a lot of hope in that story, man. I mean, this whole idea of if it's going to be easier for me to be a complete asshole, that is not what we want, right?
Well, Tim, it's always easier for you to be a complete asshole, but we won't go there. All right.
But that's just me.
So here's what I'd say to that. I think you're right. I think it is easier, but the cost of that is far greater. The cost of turnover, lower productivity, lower levels of creativity, health goes in the toilet. I mean, people begin to have these really negative experiences of work. But when we live above that line and we take a little bit of time to treat people, to meet people where they are, if I have to hold an employee accountable at work, I get that. It's part of my job as a leader, but I can do that with a place of dignity as well. So it's not accountability. It's about holding someone accountable with dignity and being empathetic in the moment. Like, yeah, this is tough. This is tough news to get. And how do I do that?
So this is tough, right? And as you're talking about all the things that make this difficult. So what can a manager, what can a leader in an organization do to help be that positive, empathetic, person who is going to, engage his or her team and not be that asshole like Tim here, and just use humiliation.
So are you asking is like, they want to stop acting like me? Is that it? They want to stop being a stinky leader, Brad. How does
they
that
want to? That's right. Well, I think one of the challenges that we have in the workforce today in organizations is people are at capacity. I mean, who's got this space to be present in the moment all the time? I mean, I don't even have. If I'm being really honest with you about this, and my wife listens to this, and she probably will. I don't know that I have the presence of mind to be those things when I'm at home. And I love those people. I've been married to my wife. We're in our 18th year now. We have an 8-year-old little girl at home. I'm not even sure. Thank you very much. I don't even know that I can do that stuff at home all the time. So the first thing I think we have to do is we have to tackle this issue of overcapacity at work. And the second thing we have to do is introduce this idea of grace and that self-compassion that comes along with that, as well as compassion for other people. Sometimes one of the most difficult things we do is to give ourselves the compassion that we need to step away and heal, and give ourselves a little bit of grace. Like, I messed that up today, but that doesn't define me as a human being. I can be better next time, and I will.
We talked to Steve Sisler a few episodes ago, and he was talking about the importance of being willing to accept the compliment. That when you've made your best lasagna and you put it in front of someone and you say, "What do you think?" and they say, "This is delicious. I just love it." And then if you come back and say, "Well, I don't know, there could have been more meat in the sauce."
That's right. I think we do that all the time.
I know I do.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that. But doing it at work, I think, would be really hard because the work environments tend to be more about success, and not so much about, well, this wasn't an optimal engagement on this project.
So I think one of the things that I would want to make like upfront is that this isn't about like soft stuff. So this isn't about like squishy rainbows and unicorns and everybody just kind of hug everybody. But the science behind this is actually quite real and quite compelling. So I agree. I think maybe we want to reframe some things about work and what success looks like. When I work with leaders, I'll often say it's not about what work gets done. It's about how that work gets done. And if we can think just as much about how it gets done as about what gets done and what gets counted, we might fundamentally shift the way people experience work across organizations.
So talk a little bit about that research. You're saying that this is some quantitative stuff. So help our listeners understand, what does the research actually say about this kind of compassion and the way that you're looking at this?
Yeah, so the compassion stuff is brand new, and we're super stoked about it. It is about how people live into this new space of work. So what we're finding is that leaders are being asked to show up differently at work, but we don't know what that means. So what are the new skills, and how are people interacting with their places of work and experiencing their work? And compassion is a way in which we have conceptualized that idea. The research says this, that the 3 leader behaviors that drive things like engagement, turnover, and performance are dignity, accountability, and empathy. But in that model are 3 other behaviors around presence and authenticity and just connecting to this idea of being very human-centered.
You know, Brad, I'm thinking back to early days that we met many years ago, and you talked about what it was like being a manager yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't come to academia right out of college. You
Yeah.
actually took some time off to work in the real world, as they say. How much of those experiences inform the research that you're working on now?
It is the narrative of my research. It's the reason that I did it. You know, in those experiences, the really tough experiences for me defined why I wanted to know more about this idea of engagement. How do I create places of work that help people live their best life versus suck the soul from them? And I had to walk away from leadership. And not a lot of people know this story, but I was in some really unhealthy spaces with leaders who supervised me. And when I walked away from that, I had to heal. And it took me about 2 years before I would even consider another leadership position, supervising anybody, because I was not in a good space at that time. I was very discounting. I thought that, I had some issues and problems, which is where our stinky and dysfunctional leadership research was kind of born out of.
You know, I don't want you to feel like you need to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not interested in that. But for our listeners, could you elaborate just a little bit on what that environment was like?
Yeah, so I had a supervisor who was my direct leader, threatened to hit somebody in a meeting. I mean, raised their hand and was going to absolutely come across their face in a meeting.
Oh my gosh.
And you think about that and you're like, does that really happen in places? And the truth of the matter is, I've heard from countless people across the country that those things happen. Continuously, psychologically demoralized, discounted, taking credit for ideas that weren't theirs, withholding information, ignoring people selectively to punish them. And I was in a mid-manager position at the time. And so my job was to keep the crap from rolling downhill. So I tried my best to stop that so that the people that worked with me didn't have to endure that. And the sad part about that is they felt his effects anyway.
That's a hard. It's really hard to be the dam when the water's coming so hard, right?
And it's just,
you just can't stop it.
You can. It's kind of like a fire hose. And the day that I submitted my resignation letter, right after he went to smack a female colleague of mine across the face, and we stopped the meeting before anything got really physical. He got very angry with me, stopped talking, and then on my very last day of work, called out sick on that day. And that was his habit when people would leave, because they weren't leaving the company, they were leaving him, and they were disowning. There was a psychological thing that was going on there where he felt like he was being disavowed, if you will. It took a long time to heal from that.
Yeah, it's surprising because I've been very lucky to, in all of my work situations, or most of my work situations, work in a very positive, really, enriching, engaging, work environment. And so even
your company now.
Well, outside of working with you, and my boss now is an asshole, but that's me.
But that's you, yeah.
I can't help you with that.
Yeah, I know. There's a bigger issue there. We won't, we won't go there. But I do not find it surprising that there are organizations out there that have this, and I have run across them. I haven't had to be part of them, but I've run across in the consulting work that we do that you realize this, that you realize that there are managers, and maybe not so much to the physical component that you're talking about, but a lot of those mental games that people play, and that power. I need to make sure I maintain power, and in order to do that, you need to be pushed down, and all those different factors. And so, is there, in your opinion, is there a way, if I'm a CEO or a big leader, but that manager who might be doing that is a really good, high performing manager, that their business unit is doing great, is it better to get rid of that person, or just, wear the consequences of the negativity?
Well, so here's how I would respond to that. I think that if you keep that person, you are putting employees at health risk. And so you have to be able to, if I'm that leader, I've got to be able to go home at night and say, this person's performance is so good that I'm willing to ruin other people's lives because this guy or this gal can records 20% performance revenue over the last quarter. And for me, I'm going to call bullcrap on that. And the other thing I'm going to say about that is that those power bases are a myth. They go away. The very first time somebody sees a chink in that armor, they will yank that armor off as fast as they possibly can and throw that person under the bus.
Yeah. So help us understand, because I know you're doing some research on the health effects of this now. And so as you're talking about can you sleep at night? Because not only are you, making these people miserable, but you're actually impacting their health and their life, going forward. Help us understand some of that research and what you're doing.
Yeah, so some of your listeners might be familiar with this idea called social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are these large-scale social factors that impact people's health. So, for example, the geographical area of the city that I live in may not have access to certain things like food or adequate doctors or things like that. And as a result of that, I'm at higher risk for developing heart disease or different risk factors. So we began to wonder, grounded in this very research around stinky leaders, do these people impact people's health over the long term? So I'm
gonna stop you here. Stinky leaders, because Tim said it, and now you said it, and I'm pretty sure our listeners are going, what does the smell of my leader have to do with all this? So I don't think that's what you mean. So help explain what a stinky leader is.
Although they might be physically smelly also, what we're talking about is, like, we might use the analogy of a skunk. And this is kind of where this term came from, is if I have a dog at home, if my dog gets skunked, that smell stays for a little while. And without intentional work, that smell will stay for a very long time. And the same thing happens with people at work, where that leader professionally skunks a group of employees or a team of employees. And without intentional healing and intentional work, that dysfunction that occurred on that team is likely to stay with those people over the long term. So it impacts their decision making 10 years down the road. If I ask you to think about that person, your blood pressure rises, you get a little hot under the collar. So that's why we say stinky is just like this, a skunk would skunk an animal, leaders can professionally skunk employees.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Scary, but fascinating.
Well,
so go on. Stinky leaders that your work on that was leading to this health outcomes
social
components.
determinants of health. Yeah.
Yeah. So this health outcome. So we wondered, like, okay, do these people impact someone's health risk factors later in life? So as a result of this really dysfunctional experiences, are there things that happen to me in my body, in my health, that account for some of those experiences and the reasons why? So we asked people about their sleep. So do these things happen to you at work, and how annoying, how traumatic are they? We have this, we call it a stinky taxonomy. It's a super academic term.
Wow, I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yeah, super academic, and we literally like plotted out the behaviors that are the most traumatic and the most annoying and the things that happen most frequently and so on. And what we found was that there was a relationship between those stinky behaviors, so things like ignoring me, withholding information, using your power base in a dysfunctional way, to people answering questions like, I don't sleep very well at night at all. In fact, I lay in bed awake at night a lot, and I get sick to my stomach on Sunday nights. People told us that they drank more alcohol as a result of those experiences. People told us that they were less likely to go to the gym. They were more likely to eat fast food. And those kinds of things are indicators of long-term health risk. Now, what we've done is we've connected with our medical school here at the university, and we are working in a randomized clinical trial that's already ongoing. And we're going to plug and play in there and ask them about, all right, can you tell us a little bit about your work experience? And what we wonder is, when we look at people's cortisol levels, or we take cheek swabs, or we do a full blood panel on them, is there any relationship to anything that we can find about experiences of work and these health outcomes? And we call those things work determinants of health. And so we think, go ahead. Well, we think there are these broad-based categories of work culture that could help us understand unexplained variance in health outcomes. So social determinants of health, for example, can explain about 30 to 35% of the overall variance in health risk. That's a tremendous amount of variance explained. The challenge with that is there's still 70% that's unexplained. And work has become such a central part of people's lives. So if work is a central part of my life and my identity, and I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about being in my workplace, are there factors of work that are intangible? So relationship with my leader, relationship with my coworker, what's my culture like here? Do I feel like my job is meaningful? My work is meaningful? Do I feel psychologically safe? Do I feel physically safe? Do those things have an impact on things like hypertension and heart disease?
You're kind of taking the old Gallup question from the Q12 about I have a friend at work, really, and putting that on steroids is what it sounds like. You're really blowing that up and going deeper into what it really means to be in the social environment at work, right?
Yes, I think that's a really good way to think about this. That this is about the employee experience and its connection to things like engagement, recognition, value propositions, and using behavioral economics as a way to explain some of this.
It's surprising to me that obviously this is research that hasn't been done before, but when you talk about it becomes really apparent. As you said, work is the central component of our lives. We spend, the vast majority of our waking day at work, doing work, and particularly now, even when you come home from work, you're still doing work because you have your phone with you and you're answering emails until all hours of the night, et cetera, and all of those factors, that they haven't looked at this connection between health and that component of work. I know there's probably been other work studies with health, but that's probably job related as opposed to manager, societal, kind of relationship related.
Yeah, so we are really trying to look at the broad-based factors of work culture that we
Hmm.
can explain and then connect to these health outcomes. And what we're really excited about is that this data is going to be collected at different times, and so there's going to be this time wave parameter to it, and then we're going to be actually looking at blood data, at cortisol levels, at stress. One of the things that we met with a student here at the university who's doing neuroscience research and looking at brain scans, and the work that he's doing, they've already got brain scans. We can go back and ask some questions and look at, all right, how does this stuff impact our neural pathways and create pathways that weren't there before that are now stuck in dysfunction.
Wow.
Cool
I think
stuff,
that
man.
it is really cool. So what you're gathering the data? You haven't done a complete analysis, but Brad, what are your intuitions on this? What are your guesses about where you think this is headed?
So, to take maybe a more positive spin on this, here's what I think. I think there's going to be a real business case, a real return here on developing cultures of engagement, and looking at building places where people flourish, where there is words like joy and happiness. I'll tell, if I can, one quick story. I was in India a couple of months ago, and I was doing a SHRM workshop. And there were 30 people in the room. They were all executive level. And I asked the question as a teaser to get us started, why do you come to work in the morning? And we expected this normal answers. I get paid. I got bills. I got kids. It's funny how that they go to work in India for the same reasons that many people in the United States come to work.
Oh, they're human, I guess.
They're human, absolutely. And this lady stood up in the back and she said, I come to work because I feel like I'm loved. And that shifted everything in the conversation. And to this day, man, like I can tell you where I was standing in the room, and there was an audible gasp. Like I never thought about that. And when we got to go to that space, when you ask me about meaningful work, man, that's really meaningful work. When I'm coming to work and I'm with people that I know care about me, they have my back, they're willing to help me out, go the extra mile for me, and that I'm willing to do the same thing, man, that's love and that's joy. And those things drive intangible outcomes that I don't even know we can measure yet.
It's interesting how you talk about that, because to a certain degree, it does seem fluff, right? I mean, if I'm just listening to this and hearing, oh, you just talk about love and joy and different pieces, it's like you said, unicorns and rainbows, right?
Yeah.
But there's a tangible component within that, and culture is one of those aspects that I think inside organizations that it becomes this kind of the sea that we're swimming in, and we don't even notice it, right? And all of a sudden we don't even realize how that's impacting what we're doing on a day in and day out basis. And so those are the factors that, if we pay attention to them and purposefully focus on making those positive, and to your point, having that joy, having that love as part of it. And yeah, those words might not seem like they resonate within a corporate business setting, but there's some reality there. There's some actual elements of how people process the information and how they work together. And as you said, there's that gasp in the room, and now you've switched that conversation. How do we get people to purposely focus on that, and how do we get people to move in that direction? Do you have any words of wisdom for us? We're searching here.
Yeah, one of the things is to switch the way in which we talk about work. The value proposition of work has changed, and it has shifted over the past 2 decades, where it was once a very transactional value proposition. So I get this and you give me that. And I think now what people are very, because what's being asked of them has changed, right? Mm-hmm. When you're right, when I go home, I'm checking emails, or I'm writing papers, or I'm putting together presentations. I teach at the university until 9:00 at night. I don't get home to see my family, and I'm not home till 10:30 or 11 o'clock. The ask for me is different there, right? And so the value proposition has changed. And what I need from my place of work and isn't about being in a place, it's about this experience of what it means to be a faculty member at this university. What are the intangible things that I get out of this? How do I feel like I'm valued as a member of the team? One of the most striking things that we found in our research was that the most powerful dysfunctional behavior that leaders exhibit and that coworkers exhibit, and I would also argue community members and spouses exhibit, is ignoring somebody. Now that's funny to me. So I would have expected to find like throws stapler at head is the most dysfunctional thing somebody could do, right? Steals all of my money. What people consistently told us was that being ignored was incredibly difficult. It was psychologically damaging. Now, why would that be the case? Because when somebody says, I'm being ignored, they say, oh, I see you there, Tim, but I don't care. I don't care that I see you there.
Wow.
I notice you and I'm intentionally ignoring you. It's not that I didn't see you. No, I see you, brother, but I don't care about you.
Oh,
and that's,
yeah, that is brutal.
Brother, that's hurtful. That's really, really hurtful. Wow. And I think we have to think about the value proposition of work and how that's shifted over the last couple of decades. In particular, the last 5 to 10 years, I think it's significantly shifted because the ask is different. And I think we have to begin to think about how this work gets done, not just what work gets done. Words like compassion, I don't know that I'm sold on the idea of the word of compassion. It's the word that we used in the paper that we published. When we go into rooms and executive teams and I use the word compassion, I get the same response that I got when I went in to do my dissertation study when I was at Florida International and I said the word employee engagement and I got laughed out of the boardroom. And they would be like, who cares? Why would we care about employee engagement? I just want people to show up and do their jobs. And I literally got laughed out of dozens of executive rooms because who would care about that? And now people cannot get enough of it. It is essential to have an engaged workforce. It is essential to focus in that area. And how many billions of dollars every year do people spend on employee engagement surveys and interventions when just 10 years ago, nobody cared about it? I think it's going to change.
So I appreciate that. And I think that it's a really compelling story, right? That compassion is going to be there. I want to go back. You talked about the value proposition of work has changed, and I see that continually changing. And one of the things that I've been paying more and more attention to lately is just the automation that's happening inside of work, and this facet of, wow, those jobs that used to be there are being automated away. That social group that we used to have, 100 people in here, now we have 10 that are doing the same thing on the manufacturing floor. So we don't have that communal aspect of what's going on and different pieces. I don't know if any of your research has pointed to some of the components of automation and the impact that that's having on people in this realm.
Sometimes I get asked about my opinion on artificial intelligence in the human resource space. So I'm a professor of human resources and org development at the University of Louisville. And people will say, well, what do you think about artificial intelligence in HR? And I think it's terrific. I think it's great. But I think we also have to invest as much in the human side of things as we do into the artificial intelligence side, into the tech side of things. And I don't see people doing that. And that's concerning to me. The other thing that I would say about automation is that we faced this in the past with when we had we built automobile factories, right? So car factories where these are going to take jobs away from hardworking people, and where are they going to go? They went to new tech related jobs that supported the automation that was occurring. So I think we've seen this before, and we've evolved. What I think is really cool about this is I think it gives us the capacity to now think about the human side of work. And so if things are being automated, that frees up capacity and space in my life to be able to think about the kinds of relationships and social connections that I need at work to be able to get my best work done.
Yeah, and I think to that point, at least the part that is being automated first are those routine components that oftentimes we find really mind-numbing, dull kind of components. And so it offers that opportunity for that work to be more rewarding from that perspective of, hey, I am doing something that is actually meaningful, not just the checking box after box or putting,
Absolutely.
tickets in whatever, space that needs
Well,
to
and
be.
it gets back to what Brad was talking about earlier with having meaning, really having meaning that what my task is connects to some larger perspective, some impact that I'm having on customers or
And that's
or other
that's
workers.
that's such an easy thing to do. We did some research in the healthcare space where we looked at a group of they're called child life therapists or child life specialists. They're a very niche group, often found in pediatric facilities, where they will come in and they are the social emotional advocate for that child on a what's going to be a really bad day. They've got a bad diagnosis. They've got some kind of traumatic issue that has happened in their life. And this child life therapist comes beside that child and works directly with that family. Now, what's important about that is they're not a member of the they're not a medical doctor. So they're not a member of the medical team per se. And what we found is that when child life specialists would come across a particularly traumatic or challenging event that happened in their day, what gave them meaning was connecting with their coworkers, that team of specialists that came around afterwards and debriefing that event. Just talking
That's,
about it. How did it go? What happened? Easy.
that is very cool. Yeah, and it right. We are social animals. We
Yeah,
need
wired.
that. We need our tribe, right, to support us.
I think that's true.
Can I want to go back this, and I'm sorry that this is kind of rewinding a bit, but the ignoring people was, you said, like the number one issue.
Yes.
Do you mean that it comes up most frequently, or that it has the highest valence to it, that it was the highest emotional issue for it?
It has the most valence to it. So we asked people a series of questions in the Stinky Leader research, and we asked them how often do these. First of all, we read everything we could on being a really crappy boss and cataloged all of those behaviors. And then we asked people about their experiences at work. We said, do you experience any of these things? Does your boss throw things at you? Do they pressure you to use drugs and alcohol? Do they steal your ideas in meetings? Do they pull your chair out from under you? I mean, do they do all these things? And we asked them two questions. If they said yes, we then asked them two related questions. How traumatic is this for you? Is it? It's no big deal. To this really bothers me. To how frequently does this actually occur? And we found that it was the most frequently occurring high valence activity that happens to people at work in dysfunctional environments, being ignored.
Well, can you expand on that? Do you happen to remember number 2 and number 3? I am personally familiar with this ignoring issue.
Yeah.
And I've seen this in now, unfortunately not in my own work life, but in people that are close to me. I've seen this happen. But
Absolutely.
But could you expand on that list? I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, I certainly can. So when I'm looking for the research right now. The ignores my opinion was number one. The second was takes ownership of ideas. The third was breaks promises. The fourth was withholds information, and the fifth was makes negative comments about me. And what's amazing to me about those is those are all emotional, psychological experiences that people live in isolation. No one would know.
Yeah, and in some ways, it really doesn't have anything to do with the work per se.
Nope. No, it does not.
To be ignored actually doesn't, on a purely rational basis, if I were an economist, I would say, so what? Go and do your job. That's not the impact that it has.
No, we find it to be incredibly damaging at work. And the anxiety that comes from that, and in some of this work determinants of health stuff, we've had to dissect the differences between stress and anxiety. Stress is this external force that's presented to me. Anxiety is reliving that force internally over and over again. The anxiety that is produced from ignores my opinion is incredible. In some ways, it's almost incalculable, because over time, think of what this does psychologically. The opposite of that, though, is feeling connected. and being a part of a tribe and being around people that don't do those things. And think of the positive benefits that come from that. The kind of creativity, innovation, collaboration that swells from feeling like I belong here. I fit here uniquely. That's cool stuff. And I think
That
that's the
really
future
is.
of work. I think that's the future.
I hope it is. I sure as hell hope it is, man. Because that's well, like you said, the value proposition is changing. The foundations of work are changing. The hope and the question is, are they changing for the good?
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of the
Well, and I
the
think
thing.
to that point, the focus that companies, as you mentioned earlier, you were laughed out of the room when you talked about engagement, right? So this new conversation that needs to start happening inside organizations at the uppermost levels is around this compassion, around the culture that is going to be enlivening for people as opposed to deadening. And how do we as an organization come in and make that culture and work with that and be purposeful about creating that and holding people to your set. You talked about that accountability earlier, holding people accountable to saying this is who we are and that's what we do. And I think that's where culture comes in, because then you get the normative component and the social pressure to say, oh, well, I'm not acting in the way that everybody else, and you get then ostracized when you're doing the negative components of that. So
Yeah, and to not kill the meaning. I think work oftentimes inherently has meaning. I think our job is to not kill that meaning. How do we,
Yeah.
as a leader, how do I not kill the meaning that is inherent in what my employees they already love to be here. This is a cool company. This is a great place to work. How do I not kill that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and as you said earlier, there are health risks associated with the bad
There are.
leadership. With
There
these
are.
stinky bosses, there are health risks.
There are.
Okay, now it is time in our conversation to get to talk about music.
Yes, I love it. Terrific.
I love it. Fortunately, Brad, we've known each other long enough to know that that when I teed that up, I was anticipating a positive response, and I got it.
Yes.
And Kurt can just sit there and go, "Oh well."
I can ignore both of you at this point, right? Is that what I see you and I can just ignore? No, I can't ignore you. This is part of, as we've said, I actually enjoy this part. I give you grief about this, but I do enjoy it. So music, go.
So you're a drummer. You
I
are an active drummer. You don't just like sit in your basement and beat the skins. You are out actually, playing on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I play oftentimes once or twice a month. I'm pretty active, and man, music is like breathing for me. And playing the drums is we talked about automation earlier. Is almost like an automatic thing. Like I can't stop playing drums ever. I'm beating the steering wheel. I'm beating my legs. Sometimes my wife has to put her hand on my hands and be like, "You're gonna have to be still for a minute."
Oh,
So what are you listening to these days? What's on your playlist?
Yeah, so I love contemporary and modern folk music. It's my favorite genre. But I listen to a lot. I was schooled in classical and jazz as a young guy in high school and did some work in college but I have gravitated to folk music, and I love the instrumentation and the intricacies and the way that people play off of each other and create this pocket that people kind of live into as a musician. Cool stuff.
Yeah, so you're talking about a small band, small minstrel show kind of gatherings, like banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, kind of set up like that.
I'm a sucker for banjo. I'm a sucker for the mandolin. I love to see it worked in with modern instruments, as like on a big stage with drums and bass and lead guitars and how all that meshes together. But yeah, I absolutely love those kinds of intimate sessions, and my daughter does too. My daughter absolutely loves to go listen to live bluegrass music, for example.
wow.
And who would have thought an 8-year-old would love to do that, right?
Yeah, that's a head scratcher, but you know
Yeah.
what? That absolutely happens. So you and I've seen you play. I know you've got the chops. So you must come from a rich jazz heritage because you've got the chops to be able to handle jazz licks and you know how to swing. That's for sure.
I appreciate you saying that. My dad, when I was growing up as a kid, allowed me to get a drum set when I was about 12 years old.
That's a
And
risky proposition for a parent.
it was, and it was really loud. And they suffered through years and years of me banging around on drums. And man, I would practice 2 or 3 hours a day. And I don't get to do that now. But those things, it's like riding a bike. Like you get on and you got to knock the rust off a little bit. But if you can knock that rust off and you can get in the groove, it's a special place to be. It really is.
So what is it about the drums? I mean, obviously, to practice 2 or 3 hours a day on drums is that age. My 13-year-old, I can get him to practice 10 minutes on the piano every day. My God, it's like pulling teeth. So what was it that was so compelling? What is it for you about the drums?
Well, so you need to know that I have a pretty rebel personality. So if somebody tells me to do something, I'm probably not going to do it. It's very likely I'm going to do the total opposite of that thing. So I took drum lessons for about, I don't know, a couple of months, and I couldn't stand it. So what I did was I would put on headphones and connect them to my stereo, which at that time had a cassette and place to put your CDs. And I listened to Elvis. I learned how to play the drums listening to Elvis. In fact, the first paid gig I ever did was a 2-hour set of nothing but Elvis Presley music for a group of executives in finance. And it was crazy. And I was this like 15-year-old kid in this band with these professional musicians playing Elvis. It was wild. It was crazy.
I've got those same memories. I love that. So I think that is kind of the magic of music. There is something that is deeply compelling about it.
Yes.
So let's talk about artists specifically, though. Can you share some of the when you talk about contemporary folk or jazz or classical? Are there some artists, composers over the years that are going on right now that are just like, wow, really inspiring or kind of engage you in a way that others haven't?
There's this band called A Lion Named Roar, which is out of Kentucky, and their music you can find them on Amazon or Spotify. I really like their sound. I love that they're local here, and I know the lead singer personally. He's just a good human, so I'm attracted to the work. We had them come and do an event for us, and man, they just blew. It was 2 guitars and a little percussion, and they blew the roof off the place. It was incredible. I like the Mumford and Son. I like their style and their approach. One of my favorite bands is for King and Country. They are a contemporary Christian band, but their drummer is ridiculous, and his left hand is crazy. What I love about it is they play things like the accordion. They play like melodic chimes in their shows, and the drummer wears a huge top hat, and he's just bouncing all over the stage. He's like a wild man. It's crazy. And I try to do that when I play.
I was going to say, it sounds like your hero.
Yeah, totally. I've never met him. I'd love to meet him sometime. But I've watched him play a couple of different times, and his attention to rhythm, his attention to the pocket, his attention to presence, like in the song, it's just pretty incredible.
Well, are there any jazz or classical composers or performers that were particularly inspiring to you?
I get asked that question a lot, and I wish I could name 1 or 2, and I can't. I grew up listening to whatever was on the radio and whatever I could get my hands on. And I could say John Coltrane, but I've listened to his music for years and years and years. I even things like Rod Stewart and Kenny G, like I've listened to some of that stuff in my younger years because that's what I had access to.
You didn't have to say Kenny G. You didn't have to say Kenny G. I'm just saying.
He said Kenny G.
Yeah, you didn't have to, though.
Someone listening right now probably just threw up a little bit in their mouth, and I apologize. I'm sorry.
There's nothing wrong with Kenny G.
Yes, there is.
Yeah. I wouldn't listen to it now.
No.
I wouldn't listen to it now.
I'm being very judgmental about that. But.
All right. So, Brad, we don't always do this, but I think with you it might be particularly relevant. So, if we have listeners out there that are in leadership positions and various different things. Are there 2 or 3 kind of key things that you could leave our listeners with, saying, "Hey, these are the things that I think if you can think about or do that are going to really propel you to that next level"?
Yeah. So 3 things I would say is I would encourage the leaders out there to spend time thinking about the moments that really matter at work and to elevate those moments as much as they can. Whether that's somebody's first day, whether that's they need to be recognized, they get to be recognized, to live into a space and allow people to live into that space. The second thing is to not compare. So I find that comparison steals joy. And I would hope that I lead in a place where I have pure joy for somebody when something great happens to them, and not judgment of, well, I wish I could have done that, or I could do better than that, but really live into a place of joy for them. And the third thing, and this is really easy, is to go out of your way to treat people with dignity, to say hello to people in the hallway, to connect with people on a tough day, to find opportunities for recognition, and to lend a hand, to spend, and I do this in my life now, 5 extra minutes at the end of the day to send 2 or 3 emails to people who I just want to say thank you to. And they don't expect it and they don't need it, but man, is it really good to get a note from somebody that says, "Hey, I saw you in the meeting today and you crushed it, man. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you." And that's it. Those are the 3 things I would say.
Wow, those are great. Thank you.
Thank you for that wisdom, Brad.
Thank you so much.
Brad. It's great meeting
me.
you. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavior Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our stinky, ignored minds.
Wait. Why us? How couldn't it be the stinky boss ignored minds?
Oh, yes, our
stinky bosses.
But it's our minds, right? And so we're thinking about the stinky
I don't
bosses.
want to. Oh, okay. So we're not stinky bosses.
I hope we're not stinky bosses.
I don't want to be a stinky boss.
I don't think we are. I think we are good bosses.
In general, I know that I made some mistakes.
Oh, we all make mistakes. All right.
Okay, there's enough meat in the sauce, right?
There is definitely enough meat in the sauce with us. All right.
Okay,
so go for it. What are the things that you want to groove on here about Brad?
Let's start with work needs meaning.
Oh my God.
Right? What a great topic. What a great topic. And with that, I just want to say that Brad is taking not a revolutionary approach, but he's really amping up the game around employee engagement.
Yes.
The research that he's doing and the approach that he's taking to sort of evangelize this message, I think is terrific. I just think it's absolutely phenomenal, and I just want to applaud him for all the work that he's doing.
Well, and to a certain degree, it seems like it's common sense, right? Work should have meaning. Yet, I think there is a large component of not just U.S. population, I think the world population, where work is a means to an end. That this is what I do to get paid so that I can go and have a life outside of it, and I will trudge through whatever it is that I am doing here to fund and pay for the rest of my world.
Well, the employers are no different. There's still the Frederick Taylors out there that are just like, just get in there and do the damn job.
Yes.
We're just asking you to stand on this line and do this for the next 8 hours with 2 breaks and a lunch, and that's it. And just go do that. So there are still employers out there that are not helping the game. I think that there's still some that are caught in the 19th century in terms of their perspectives. So
yeah, and how much can we garner you to do what X faster and Y faster? Which, if we take Brad's research and we take the information that we're talking about, the component of this that I think is really, maybe we didn't think about this or talk about this as much, is when people find meaning in their work, I think the work actually gets better. Their work output becomes more productive, particularly if we think of more of the knowledge worker type components within there, even, to some of the more manual elements, I think there is aspects of that have shown, different things. I tell the story of my father-in-law who, out of actually before college, after high school, he went and he worked in, Southern California, working in a manufacturing company making phones, and he was working really fast day number one because he's just putting these components together in different things, and the guys came up to him and told him, no, hey buddy, you got to slow down.
Wow.
You are working too fast.
You got to fit within the social norm.
This
here.
is not how we do things here, because if you do up there, then we all have to do up there. And that does not, so don't push the envelope there.
Yeah. Well, Dan Ariely's work on the IKEA effect included a bunch of really cool studies, right? One of which I know you like to talk about, the Lego building study.
We're going up and basically having a group of college students, right, create these Lego creations, and then you bring it up and you got paid for each one as you were doing it. And in one instance, they took the Legos and they put it back on a shelf back behind, knowing that in the end those Legos were going to get taken apart and reused, right?
Yeah.
But in the other experiment, they basically started taking the Lego pieces apart right in front of the person and putting them back into the box that went out to the next one. And the result of that is that the ones where they put the Legos back up on the shelf made more. They performed better.
Right.
Because their work wasn't destroyed in front of their faces. There was some semblance of meaning within that, even if they know at some point that work is going to be destroyed, various different things. And I bring that back also to the progress principle, by Teresa Amabile, right? I think I pronounced her last name right.
Teresa Amabile.
Yeah, yep. Thank you. The work that she showed is that, hey, making progress, having that feeling that you're contributing is a significant motivator.
Yeah, and when Ariely tested this idea of what would it be like if we had a bunch of people study something and then write up a paper and some recommendations and turn it over to a committee for evaluation, when in the condition where the committee said, "Thanks very much, this is really interesting. We're going to give it some consideration. We liked your points, but we're not sure what we're going to do." That was a very different reaction than when the committee simply accepted the paper with the recommendations, didn't look at the results, and just tossed it aside and said thanks. And people just got depressed. They just felt like their work was less meaningful and they weren't interested in doing anymore. They were less interested in engaging in another round of these assessments and recommendations because they're like, no one's going to look at it. It's completely irrational. It's totally emotional. But this is part of the social construct and the reciprocity that is all woven into the tribe that we call work. Mm-hmm. And if we start to abuse that, if we discount the meaning that the work has, we're going to alienate our workers.
Well, and I loved how Brad brought in these words that we don't normally associate with work: joy, love, dignity. I can't even remember, compassion.
Yes.
Those words are important. So if I'm a leader out there in an organization, how do I actually bring meaning into the company? How do I get my employees to find meaning and to live these concepts, right? This component where he talked about the woman who said, I love the people I work with, and that changed this conversation. Well, how do you design what the job is or how you interact with your team in order to elicit those emotions? And I think it's not readily apparent that if I do X and Y, it's going to get me Z.
It's not a straight line, and it sure as hell isn't going to be a stick. You're not going to scare people into, if you don't do this, you're going to get fired.
If you don't love your job, you're going to this is horrible and you're going to get a demotion.
That's not going to work.
Find joy here now, or I'm going to, make you work extra time.
When my kids were little, I was buying toys for the holidays at Target store, and at the checkout stand, the cashier simply said, "Hey, do you have all the batteries that you need?" I'm like, "Oh, I think I do." And then she kind of helped me check through, and she said, "It looks like you're missing some." And she reached under her counter and pulled out the ones that I needed. And I was like, "Wow, are you getting an incentive for this?" And she said, "No, I just want to make sure that the customers are happy, because if you're happy, you might like the store better."
Well, because you know that if you go home and it's Christmas or whatever, the gift, and you don't have the batteries, your kids are going to be,
You're a bad dad.
And
you're a bad dad, and you don't want that.
You don't want that.
But that wasn't an incentive. There was no incentive. There was a culture of we care about, that was created where the employees felt like we care about how the customers experience our store.
So I think if I'm a leader in an organization, I think one of the big things is, how do you communicate? How do you communicate out that vision for the company?
Yeah.
How do you communicate out its mission, even what that vision and mission is? And I know that some people that are listening to this, they aren't at a CEO or that presidential level, and so they may not have control over that. But you can always do that with your own team. What does this team stand for? I remember working one time when I was, just freshly out of MBA, and I worked for BI, and we had a new leader come in, Steve Geiger, who said, "Hey, we are, we're going to be the little rebels within here, and we're going to be doing things differently." And we set our own kind of vision for what we were, and
for that division,
for the little group that we were, and it brought meaning, because it was what we're doing has a purpose, and we're going to be leading the organization. So I think you can do that, and I think the big thing is that when you talk about, hey, what are the goals for the organization, and if they're only financial goals, those are not going to be as meaningful for most employees as it is about what you're doing for the customer, for the world, for the environment, for whatever that mission is that relates back to a human component.
What do you say we break down that idea of communicating more specifically? So in your case, let's talk about the media and the way that it gets communicated. So in your case, your example is that the leader brought this to the team in like a team meeting, it sounds like, right? And there was some discussion around it, maybe even some brainstorming or some collaboration on what that's going to be and how you're going to execute that, right? So that's a way of getting that communication out. Another way might just be memos and posters and environmental kinds of things, right?
Right. Well, and think about the types of words. We've talked about framing a ton, right?
Yeah.
How do you frame that message? Do you frame that message first from this perspective of collaboration, perspective of focus on a human element, or do you frame that issue as we have, we need to grow 30% and we're only at 24%. Damn it, we got to get that extra 6%.
Or your work in the call center is only worthwhile if you close $587 worth of deals today.
Exactly. So thinking about how you structure those messages going out.
Those messages can also be framed specifically around the job categories.
Yeah.
Right? Because each job category is going to be different.
I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think, to your point, you talked about environmentals, right? Again, we talk about priming a lot here.
It's because it works.
Because it works. I remember the story where if you had pictures of your customers up on a wall in a creative ad agency, they actually looked at the output and they found that output was more creative, right? Somewhere along, and then don't quote me on which exactly study that was, because my booba mind doesn't go that way. So, but with that, those frames, those things, having the picture of the woman going through the finish line
as the watermark
in the call center, those are underlying components that send messages to us as employees about what this work is, what it stands for, how we work together. And I think the collaboration part that Brad talked about, that team aspect of having people on your team that you respect and love to a certain degree is really key to this.
I think it also has to do with the consistency of messaging across the organization, right? If you've got let's say a team leader at the call center that is saying, look, we got to love our customers. It really matters how we take care of our customers. And then her boss walks in one day and says, I don't care about loving our customers. We got to get our numbers up.
Yeah.
Well, boom, you've just destroyed whatever messaging, the team leader was doing.
Yeah.
And that inconsistency really undermines, or actually maybe it's not so much undermining as much as it's creating the culture.
It is.
It just says, well, looks like we don't really have to love our customers.
Right. And I think, so I've done some work with clients bringing in 4Drive model into organizations. And one of the things that I've done is we've done these 4Drive workshops with managers. And we work with senior leadership first to get them aligned around what this looks like and what it means. But I think also with those managers, what the 4Drive workshop does is a little bit of what Brad is trying to do here. Now, granted, you remember the 4Drive has this, there's the acquire and achieve component, which kind of is money, but it's also recognition and various different things. There's a bond and belong component, which drives right into this element of collaboration and
Very much
team
so.
and how do I feel with the people that I'm working and interacting with, and not only my coworkers, but how do I interact with my boss? How do I interact with my customers, whether they be external or internal?
And
right?
it gives context to the next one, to challenge and comprehend.
Challenge and comprehend, which is again that there's a part of that which is meaning is how am I aligning my goals? What am I doing? What is it stretching me? Is it giving me meaning intrinsically? And then the last one ties right into it,
Smack dab.
Which is this define and defend, which really is around aligning purpose, right? Taking what it is that is meaningful to me and how am I expressing that inside of this company, and how is the company expressing it back to me, which is all around that culture component. And so we work with these managers, and it's amazing in a half-day workshop going through all of those, and they're finding specific ways that they can increase those different types of attitudes and behaviors with the things that they're doing or that they're asking their employees to do.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing to see that come out, and it really ties right back into some of this stuff, which I hadn't necessarily correlated before, but it is about joy and love and dignity and all of those aspects.
It's way outside the box, right, in which we talk about this stuff, but I think Brad's really onto something here.
Yeah. All right. So
I also want to talk about this social determinants of health.
That was so awesome.
Because there's two parts of it that I love. First, stinky bosses.
Stinky bosses.
Which we are not, at least I hope not. And being ignored. When Brad was talking about being ignored at work is a bigger risk, is more powerful in the minds of the employees than having a stapler thrown at you. Wow. I was just in the realm of holy hell, what is going on in our world, where people are more concerned and reasonably so about their emotional well-being at work, and they're more scared about being ignored. Well, because it hurts a lot more.
It comes down to the psychology of it.
What?
The psychology of it.
Really?
We are, as humans, we look for that meaning that we bring to the world, that we value.
We are meaning-seeking machines.
Well, and that we have value. It's our self-identity. And ignoring our output, our contributions, or even us as beings it is like taking a big punch to that psychological gut that you have.
Right.
And it can be devastating. In all of this, stinky bosses ignoring stuff comes into that social determinants of health, which to that degree, I'm surprised that it has not been studied already.
Or
more, right?
Yeah.
Because at work, I mean, social determinants of health have in where you live and a variety of other factors.
Yeah.
But the fact that it has not been studied at work surprises me, or it hasn't been studied as much at work. And I love this idea that those toxic, I hate this idea that toxic workplaces have a negative impact on our health. I love the idea that Brad is actually looking at that, and that can lend itself into making changes in how people show up at work and how work is designed and how managers lead.
It's so interesting how our emotional state is so has such a powerful influence on how we perceive our world, right? I think about, what's the difference between, waiting 15 minutes for someone who you really don't want to meet versus waiting 15 minutes to see someone that you're really excited to see. So the two totally different experiences, right? Time in one case, the time is flying by. In another case, it's going slow. At work, when we have these situations where we're really busy, where we have a lot of work to do, and we love the work that we're doing, we just give it. We give the hours and we give the effort with a sense of joy. At least in part because we feel connected to the meaning, to get back to the first thing. But when we don't feel we're connected to something and we don't enjoy the work and we have a stinky boss and we're in a toxic environment, then everything sucks. Then working even 40 hours is like punishment.
Well, and what I find fascinating is that mental interpretation of that leads to actual physical changes in our body. And so he was talking about blood pressure, talking about our ability to sleep, talking about the stress levels that we have and the cortisol, components that are going up in our body, and all of the different hormonal changes that happen, which lend itself into, heart attacks and, stress-induced components and diabetes, type 2, because you're overeating and compensating for the stuff.
For a job that you probably don't care much about.
Exactly.
How about that?
Because you don't have the meaning, because if you had the meaning, this wouldn't be part of this.
It wouldn't be there, right.
So it is a really powerful component as we think about this, and important work. And I really hope that there's some really great insights that come out of this, and that it changes the discussion, from just a monetary component at that senior level within organizations to saying, hey, yes, we are driving these people, and you know what? I'm going to promote that guy who's an asshole because he gets the performance done.
Oh, man.
And so now that asshole is going to be, he or she is going to be above even more people. But the fact of the matter is, you're not looking at all of the costs that are associated with that, because you're not looking at those health costs that are a result of how that toxicity spreads itself throughout the organization.
And when that happens, it becomes part of the culture.
Yes.
Then it just becomes the social norm. And companies get reputations. I mean, in our town, there are major employers in this town that have reputations for being really toxic environments. People know that, and they're more reluctant to go to work there. I talk to people in the job market all the time, and they're just like, I don't think I really want to apply it there because of this reputation. Well, and those reputations are based on the company culture.
Right. And he was talking, going back to the meaning, right? And finding meaning in the component of saying how overworked we are and how do we have time to even think about some of this component. When you look at some of this toxicity within workplaces, it's the overcapacity that we are being driven to work 60, 70 hours a week in jobs where we're doing it and we don't necessarily align with the meaning and we don't have those components. It does become this toxic element that I love the skunk analogy, right? And that's with the stinky leader, right? That stinky leader sprays, and that you don't get, unless you're very purposeful and do a really good wash.
You can't wash that off.
You can't wash that off, right? So, and it goes back to, when I started off and I was doing a lot of work with teams and looking at how to develop teams and how do you enhance teams and get their productivity up and get that culture changed, people would come to me with saying, well, we have this toxic person on our team. We have this person who is the negative Nelly that brings everybody down, does all these things. And 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, I was like, well, let's work with that person. We will work with that person to get them, because all they need is to be trained or educated or whatever it would be.
Just a little bit more information.
A little bit more. Maybe
knowledge.
let's change the incentives around how they work. Let's look at all these different factors, right? Let's give them the information. It's the GI, here's how you're impacting this. And of course they'll change, and then everybody will be wonderful. What I have realized both from the research but also from personal experience, get them off that damn team as fast as you can.
Yeah,
I don't care how you do it. It is a cancer.
Well, and it might be finding the toolbox for the hammer or the salad for the tomato.
Exactly.
Right. It's not that they're necessarily a bad person.
Well, that's where I go. I don't think they're a bad person. They're a bad. They show up bad in this situation. And as much as you want to change that tomato into a hammer, it's not going to happen here.
No.
And so the best thing that you can do for both them and for your team is to remove them as quickly as possible, because there is that stinkiness that then, gets other people stinky and gets other people stinky. And it impacts, it just keeps spreading. And when you start spreading that, it's really hard to come back from that.
Have you ever been sprayed by a skunk?
Real in
real life?
Stuff?
Yeah,
no, I have not. My dog had at one point.
Yeah,
that was smelly.
Yeah, and for how long?
For a long time. What is it that you like, vinegar bath or something like that? Milk.
Milk
is
what
I don't know, but we had to do that like 2 or 3 times, and the dog didn't like the baths in general. Definitely did not like that. So
and. Probably they're not that effective either.
All right. So any more on the social determinants of health and that? So one last thing I wanted to just bring up is we talked a little bit about AI, right? And one piece I do want to just say, Brad had mentioned that, we've gone through this in the past and people have been retrained and they get into new jobs. I wanted to bring in some research that I've seen that basically said, most retraining programs are really ineffective. And there's some research that looked at, like manufacturing jobs lost in Ohio, and the number of those manufacturing jobs, people, the percentage that actually signed up for retraining programs, even when they were free, was super small. It was under 50%. And then the number of people that actually went through the entire course was, again, more people dropped out. And then the number of people that actually got a job in their new profession from that retraining course was even, I think it's somewhere around 10%. Don't quote me on that. So
it's about 10% of the total people, the total population that could have been retrained actually ended up getting a job in the new field.
Right, got in that retrained position. Yeah. So the fact of the matter is that, it works over generations. New people coming in are going to be, they're not going to go for those manufacturing jobs. They're going to go for different jobs because that's what they're going. But to take somebody who has been in a position for 20, 25, 30, even 10 years, and to expect them to be able to be retrained in a whole different field, in a whole different way, we think about manufacturing, and in most manufacturing jobs, people have a high school education. Right, or they did. Now it's actually getting more. You need more in order to work in a manufacturing plant.
That's true. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is they're doing that for a reason. They're going into manufacturing for a reason because of their aptitude or their desire to actually.
They want to work with their hands. They want to be in an environment where they're doing something very physical and very meaningful every day.
And so while I applaud the component of AI being able to help so that we can find more meaning in the work that is left, I am also very scared about AI displacing workers. Even you go to retail is going to be one of the big ones where it's going to happen, right? You look at a McDonald's already, and you go in and you don't place your order with a person anymore. You place your order on a machine that then just gets served. So, all of a sudden they can hire 2 less employees behind the counter.
That's right.
You go in.
It's going to add up.
You go in self-checkouts on all of your grocery stores and various other things. All of that is going to increase. You look at manufacturing, that's going to happen again. Anything that's repetitive in those components. You look at truck driving, you look at any of those types of services. Automated, self-driving trucks are going to be the future.
It will dominate.
Which in truck driving is one of the number one occupations in the United States right now.
Yeah,
in 29 some states, it's the number one. So all of those people that are going to be displaced, and it's not going to happen like overnight, but it will happen, and it will continue to happen. And over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to cause a huge component within the workforce that we can't just retrain away.
Right.
They're not going to be those types of jobs that are going to be equivalent in pay, that are going to do it. So we're going to have to come up with some other solutions. So that's just one of those things.
Right. You're thinking of policy solutions, some maybe political solutions.
Oh, I'm a big believer, and we've talked about this before, of universal basic income.
Yeah.
At some point where I'm looking at when you have robots doing the work, right, we're still buying those products. We are still... and not to get back into Marxism, but you're looking at this where all of the capital goes to a few people and all of the profits go to a few people that don't get redistributed back out to the workers, right? Which is not sustainable, because if the workers don't have money, then they don't have the ability to buy. And so you're creating components for people that they can no longer buy, and so then that actually it implodes upon itself.
Yeah.
My opinion. And so, but a universal basic income, just saying, hey, everybody, regardless of how much you have or don't have, gets a certain amount. It's Star Trek, right? You go and Star Trek, they don't get paid for the work they do. It's all the stuff they can just go and get. And so it's this world where things are produced. Not for anyway.
I never thought about the economics of Star Trek. I think
there's lots of people that have thought about the economics of Star Trek.
Okay, I'll have to look up a blog spot for that.
All right.
I'm more concerned when it comes to universal basic income. Without it, at some point in the future, if we have millions of displaced workers, I'm concerned about black markets, developing. No. That if people aren't going to have a way to earn money, they simply won't be needed in the workforce. Then it becomes a society of black market people. That people will start getting ingenious about ways. Well, I have to, make ends meet. So I'm gonna start selling something illegal.
Yeah.
Well,
you have that, and then you also have the whole component of. A revolution spurring, because when we know from history, when income disparity when the rich get too rich and the poor get too poor,
the bad things happen.
You know what?
Yeah.
There's a lot more of those poor people, and
That's right.
The component, and so there's all that the dystopian future that we don't want to necessarily go down. But I think there's a key concept there, and how that gets implemented, how it gets put in place via policy is important, and I think there are concerns over it. I get that. There's the cost of it. Who pays for it? How does it pay? Does it raise all the prices?
We don't have all the data on this.
But to that degree, looking out 10, 20 years in the future, if we don't do it, I think the problems are much larger than the challenges that we're going to be facing otherwise. So,
okay, so let me ask you a music question.
Go for it.
How about that? So you moved around a lot as a child. Not a lot, but you lived in different places.
I lived in the Midwest.
You stayed in the Midwest.
Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota. There
you bounced around. So what I'm wondering is, did those different places influence your musical interests differently?
Oh, so like when I was in Wisconsin, did I like the polka? And then when I came...
Kind of. I mean, but each, right? I mean, if certainly radio stations and music that is available nationally is just available nationally, but still there are regional differences, and there could be city differences. Do you think that a particular DJ in a particular town could have influenced you, or what your friends were listening to in a town in Iowa could be different from a town in Wisconsin?
That's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that from that perspective before, because I would have said, first off, no, I think I was there. But then once you mentioned that, I'm going, wow, I think that's actually true. So I will use the example. So when I moved up to Minnesota after getting my MBA, and I moved up here and have lived up here ever since. I moved from Iowa City, and Iowa City had this radio station, which was the university radio station, KFAI, which had, the new kind of progressive, rock and roll that I liked.
Okay.
It played those kind of components. When I first moved up here, there was no equivalent radio station that I could find in Minnesota, in Minneapolis.
Okay.
About 6 to 8 months later, all of a sudden there was, I forget what it was called, Rock 100, or I forget what it was called. But it was the alternative music station, and I immediately gravitated to that. But otherwise, I was listening to classical rock, because that's what they had available here versus country versus pop versus whatever it was. So yes, I think that does influence. I think growing up, I grew up at least in high school years in Iowa, and I still like Boston, and I know many people sit there and go, "Oh my God, Boston is horrible," and I'm going,
Boston sold a lot of records, so it wasn't like you were the only one.
I know, but
you hadn't discovered an underground, undervalued.
Well,
band,
no, because the radio stations that I listened to
were playing a lot of Boston.
Were the classic rock stations that were playing that. So that's what I was exposed to, and thus it's what I ended up listening. It's going back to a conversation we had before where I was talking with my son, and he was talking about all that 80s rock sounds the same to me, and I go, all your rap sounds sound the same to me, because if you only hear them once or twice, you don't get into the nuances, and you don't get familiar with them enough. And I think there's that component of, you listen to a radio station long enough and they play the same types of music over and over, you become accustomed to it and you start to like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Mere exposure effect, right?
Mere exposure, absolutely, makes a difference. Okay, cool. Well, thanks, listeners, for hanging out with us today. Thanks for listening in. We always appreciate you taking the time to give us a review, because reviews make a difference. They actually contribute to our rankings in Apple and other systems advertising programs. So,
and the reason for that, the meaning for us, is not because we want to be ranked up high in the ratings. I mean, that's a little ego boost.
I don't know. I'd kind of like that.
There's a little ego boost there, but for us, it's really is about getting more. It's exposing what we're doing.
It's expanding the community
to more people and expanding this community, which is what ultimately our goal is. We want to have this community be a viable, large community that, as we're looking out in the future, we're also looking at ways, how do we get this community to be able to interact with each other beyond just the podcast, which is why we're doing live events and other different components.
Because we've got listeners in more than 100 countries, and that's cool, but they're all disconnected right now.
Right.
And part of the future could be to be more integrative.
Yes. So that's why we want you to give a rating if you feel like you're getting meaning and value from this program. Leave us a good rating.
So
thank you.
Thanks for listening.